If you've ever believed that kindness doesn't have to be loud to be powerful, if you've ever witnessed a silent gesture, a warm cup of coffee, a smile, a shared umbrella, and felt its weight echo longer than words ever could, then this channel is for you. Here at Justice Reloaded HD, we bring you real heart-touching stories where the quietest acts can change the loudest parts of someone's life. So if you believe in the unseen, in those who give without needing to be seen, hit that like button, and subscribe so you never miss another story that might just restore your faith in humanity. Because today's story begins not with a grand event, but with a single pancake, and a colored pencil placed in front of a boy who hadn't spoken in months. And what happened next, no one could have predicted. Her name was Jasmine Ray, 29 years old, soft-spoken, and often invisible in the rush of everyday life. Most days, you could find her behind the counter at a modest diner tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop in Louisville, Kentucky. She wasn't the kind of person who made noise when she walked into a room. In fact, people rarely noticed when she entered, or when she left. But Jasmine had learned early in life that the ones who watch quietly often see the most. Since her mother passed away 2 years ago, Jasmine had been on her own, working double shifts, barely making rent in a small weather-worn apartment on the east side of town. During the weekdays, she served pancakes and coffee with a tired smile. On weekends, she scrubbed hallways and changed bed linens at a nearby nursing home. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept the lights on. And more importantly, it kept her grounded, connected to people whose stories echoed her own in quiet, painful ways. Before all this, Jasmine had been a college student studying early childhood development. She had dreams once, of working with children, helping them feel seen and understood in a world that too often silenced them. But when her mother's illness worsened, Jasmine didn't hesitate. She dropped out without ceremony and returned home to care for the woman who had given her everything. Grief, when it came, was slow and sharp. It carved space in her chest she hadn't realized was there. But Jasmine didn't wallow. She worked. She listened. And she paid attention, not to the loud, but to the overlooked. The elderly man who always sat in the corner booth alone. The couple who argued in hushed tones but held hands anyway. The child who scribbled in silence while his mother stared blankly at her coffee. Jasmine saw them all. Because that's who she was. She didn't chase attention. She didn't speak unless she had something worth saying. But she had a gift, an ability to read what people couldn't say, to recognize when someone needed more than just a refill on their drink. It was in the way she folded napkins like small pieces of origami, the way she refilled your coffee without interrupting your thoughts, the way she noticed when a child's shoelace was untied and knelt down, unbothered by who was watching, to tie it. Jasmine wasn't rich. She didn't have a large following, or a voice that carried across rooms. But she had presence. She had heart. And even though the world often rushed past her, the people who needed her always seemed to find her, like gravity pulling quiet souls into orbit. That morning at the diner, she was just doing what she always did, cleaning tables, pouring coffee, observing the lives unfolding around her like open books. She didn't know that her life was about to change. She didn't know someone was watching. And she certainly didn't know that one small gesture would soon ripple far beyond the walls of that little diner. It was the kind of afternoon where the rain didn't pour, it whispered. The windows fogged up with the breath of drizzle, and the streets outside the diner glistened like a faded photograph. Inside, the diner was unusually quiet. A few regulars sat with their heads buried in newspapers, and the soft hum of the coffee machine offered the only soundtrack to the slow gray day. Jasmine moved about with practiced grace, cleaning menus, topping off mugs, checking on the few patrons who needed little more than warm food and silence. But then, in the far corner near the window, her eyes caught on something that made her pause. A boy. No older than 6, sitting stiffly on a red vinyl bench. Next to him sat a woman, her hair damp, her coat too thin for the weather, her expression hollow in a way Jasmine recognized. She cradled a cup of coffee like it was a lifeline, staring into the dark liquid as if searching for something lost. The boy didn't move. Didn't fidget. Didn't even glance around the room like most children might. His eyes were locked on the tissue dispenser in the center of the table, unblinking. His hands lay folded in his lap. Still. Too still. No one else noticed. But Jasmine did. She didn't rush over or greet them with a bright smile. She didn't ask if he wanted chocolate milk or try to tickle a grin out of him. Instead, she did what her instincts told her. She walked to the back, pulled a clean plate from the warmer, and carefully placed a pancake in the center, shaping it into a smiley face using blueberries for eyes and a curve of strawberry jam for the mouth. She reached into her apron and retrieved a single slightly worn colored pencil, green, her favorite color when she was a child, and folded one of the diner's tissues into a small triangle, just like her mother used to fold napkins for her lunches when life was simpler. No words. Just a plate, a pencil, and a folded napkin, carried gently to the boy's table like an offering. She set them down in front of him slowly, her movements deliberate, like a dance meant for just one person. The boy didn't react at first. Jasmine didn't expect him to. She didn't wait for a thank you or a smile or even eye contact. She simply placed a small pot of syrup on the side of the table and stepped back. The woman looked up, startled by the gesture. Jasmine offered only a small nod, not seeking conversation, only connection. Minutes passed. The rain tapped gently on the glass. And then, something shifted. The boy's hand, small, delicate, lifted slowly and reached for the pencil. He turned the triangle of tissue over, staring at it like it was a puzzle. And then he began to draw. Not carefully. Not with intention. Just soft, chaotic scribbles, the kind that said more than any sentence could. Jasmine stayed near but gave them space. She refilled the woman's coffee quietly, offering a reassuring smile without expectation. She didn't know their story. Didn't need to. But in that moment, the silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was shared. A quiet that didn't ask for fixing, only understanding. At first, there was nothing. The boy didn't flinch. Didn't look up. The pancake remained untouched. The colored pencil lay still beside the folded napkin like forgotten toys from another life. But Jasmine didn't take it personally. She simply moved back behind the counter and resumed her quiet rhythm, checking on the regulars, wiping down the soda fountain, occasionally glancing toward the corner booth where stillness held its breath. Then, something shifted. Tiny fingers reached for the pencil, not in eagerness, but hesitantly, like they weren't sure they remembered how. The boy turned the napkin over once, twice, then pressed the green tip to the soft surface. His strokes were slow, clumsy, without form. But he kept going. Lines curved. Crossed. Some jagged. Some spiraling. It wasn't art. It was emotion, spilled out in color. Jasmine didn't interrupt. Instead, she refilled the mother's coffee quietly, leaving the pot on the table like an offering. The woman looked up, eyes tired but grateful, and gave a faint nod. She hadn't touched her toast. She hadn't said a word. Until now. Her voice was barely above a whisper, cracked, like a window left open too long in the cold. He hasn't spoken since his father died. 6 months ago. Jasmine paused. Let the words settle in the air between them. The kind of truth that doesn't need fixing, only space. She didn't ask questions. Didn't lean in with pity. She just offered a soft smile and replied gently, "Then today, we'll speak with pancakes and colors." The woman blinked. Her eyes welled, but she held the tears back with a kind of strength only mothers understand. Jasmine then did something she rarely did. She sat down. Not for long. Just a few minutes. Long enough for her presence to feel less like service and more like company. She didn't say a word. Just watched the boy draw, sometimes stopping to adjust the napkin, sometimes resting her chin on her hand like she was watching a masterpiece unfold. The boy didn't look up at first. But then he did. Just once. A fleeting glance, curious, uncertain. His eyes met hers. And for a second, the storm behind them cleared. Then came something unexpected. He smiled. Small. Soft. Barely there. But real. And Jasmine smiled back, not wide, not grand, but with a kind of warmth that says, I see you. No one clapped. No music swelled. No miracles announced themselves. But for Jasmine, that moment felt like grace, like the kind of breakthrough that doesn't scream but sighs. A beginning. In a world that often demands words and answers and explanations, she had found something else entirely, the quiet language of presence. The understanding that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply stay. He sat alone, tucked in the corner by the fogged-up window, his presence nearly invisible to the casual diner patron. A dark blue coat draped over his shoulders, the kind that whispered old money rather than screamed it. He stirred his tea slowly, watching the steam curl into the air like ghosts of something lost. His name was Russell Delaney. Most wouldn't recognize him, and that was by design. Once the public face of Horizon Media, one of Kentucky's largest and most influential communication networks, Russell had withdrawn from the spotlight after tragedy struck. 2 years ago, a car accident stole his only son, a boy with bright eyes and a laugh that used to echo through boardrooms and garden halls alike. Since then, Russell had traded televised interviews for quiet cups of tea, stockholder meetings for early morning walks, and Forbes covers for silence. He wasn't hiding, he was healing. Or trying to. But grief has a way of making the world look blurry, like watching life happen through rain-streaked glass. Nothing quite in focus. Nothing quite within reach. That afternoon, as the rain stitched lines across the windowpane, Russell had simply wanted to sit. To think. To feel nothing for a little while. Until he noticed her. Not in a dramatic way. Not with fanfare or a sudden rush of music in his mind. Just a feeling, a shift in the air. She moved like someone who had known loss but hadn't let it make her cruel. Her hands were steady. Her gaze, soft but precise. And when she noticed the boy, when she brought him that pancake and the colored pencil, Russell felt something stir deep in his chest. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Recognition. It was in the way she didn't speak. The way she didn't demand a response from the boy, or even expect one. It reminded him of the therapists who used to sit with his son after the accident, the good ones. The ones who didn't push or pry. The ones who knew that sometimes the best thing you can offer is your quiet company. He watched Jasmine from behind his tea, eyes narrowing slightly. She wasn't performing kindness. She wasn't looking for praise. She wasn't even aware she was being observed. She was simply present. And that, in Russell's world of headlines and high expectations, was rare. As the boy began to draw and Jasmine sat beside him without intrusion, Russell's throat tightened. He took a slow sip of tea to steady himself, but it didn't help. The memory of his son at that age, small hands gripping crayons, drawing superheroes with crooked capes and big hearts, came rushing back. He blinked hard, pressed his fingers to the bridge of his nose. There it was again, that ache. But this time, it was different. This time, the ache came with hope. Because watching Jasmine, Russell didn't just see his past. He saw something else entirely, a woman who could speak fluently in silence. Who could reach a child no one else seemed to notice. Who carried empathy like a second skin, unspoken but unmistakable. And in that moment he knew. He didn't know her name. Didn't know her story. But he knew she was exactly the kind of person his son would have run to. And maybe, just maybe, she was the person he had been hoping to find all along. The next morning, Jasmine arrived at the diner before sunrise, as she often did when sleep felt optional. The air outside was still cool, the pavement damp with last night's rain, and the city hadn't quite stretched awake yet. She unlocked the door with a familiar click, flipped on the lights, and walked behind the counter, ready to begin another quiet routine of wiping tables, brewing coffee, and pretending her heart wasn't still carrying yesterday. But something was different. There, resting neatly atop the stainless steel counter, was a cream-colored envelope. It looked out of place, too elegant for the cracked laminate, too deliberate for a place where ketchup stains were more common than calligraphy. Her name was written across the front. Jasmine Ray, in careful, deliberate handwriting. Not rushed. Not printed. It was the kind of script that made you pause. She hesitated for a moment, glancing toward the door, half expecting someone to walk in and explain. But the diner was empty, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the wall clock. She opened the envelope with cautious fingers. Inside were two things, a handwritten letter and a check. Jasmine's breath caught as her eyes registered the amount, $150,000. She blinked, looked again. No, it wasn't a mistake. She turned to the letter next, unfolding the thick paper slowly. The words were written in the same careful script, each sentence spaced just enough to feel thoughtful, not rehearsed. You didn't ask questions. You didn't look away. You simply saw, and quietly did what was needed. That's a rare gift. One I used to see, in my son. Thank you for sitting with the silence. Thank you for speaking in a language that doesn't use words. Please use this gift for the path I believe you were born to walk. It was signed with only 2 letters. A.D. Jasmine read the letter twice, then a third time, her hands trembling slightly. It didn't say where the money came from. It didn't offer instructions or promises or demands. Just gratitude. Quiet. Undeniable. She sank onto one of the diner stools, the kind with the squeaky red cushion and the peeling chrome edge, and stared at the check again. She wasn't used to being seen, not like this. Not truly. Her acts of kindness had always been quiet, invisible, meant for no one but the person who needed them. And yet, someone had seen her anyway. She thought of the boy. The pencil. The pancake. The moment when he finally smiled. She thought of his mother's tired eyes. And of the man near the window, the one who hadn't said a word but had watched everything. It had to be him. And somehow, that made the gift feel even heavier, not in burden, but in meaning. Jasmine clutched the envelope to her chest for a long moment, letting the weight of it settle into her bones. Not just the money, the message. A stranger had trusted her with something sacred. And she knew deep down that whatever came next, it would not be for her alone. Jasmine didn't rush. She sat with the letter and the check for a few days, letting the weight of it settle not just in her bank account, but in her soul. She knew the money could fix a lot, overdue bills, a better apartment, maybe even a reliable car that didn't rattle when it turned left. But deep down, she also knew this wasn't just money. It was permission. Permission to become the version of herself she'd once set aside. So she enrolled back in school, the same program she had left years ago when her mother's health began to decline. Early childhood development. It was harder this time. She was older, more tired, and carried years of practical knowledge but little recent academic rhythm. Still, she poured herself into every class, every assignment. She worked nights at the diner to stay grounded. But her eyes, her energy, they were fixed on something ahead. She graduated with distinction. But Jasmine wasn't chasing a title or a diploma to hang on the wall. She was chasing impact, the kind that sticks, long after the applause fades. So she did something bold. She rented a small sunlit space on the corner of 8th and Maple, once a bakery, long since abandoned. She cleaned it herself, painted the walls soft yellow, and filled the space not with toys or tablets, but with warmth. She named it the listening table. There were no bells or whistles. Just 4 round tables, each with a paper napkin folded neatly in the center, a small tin of colored pencils, and a plate that always had a pancake with a smiley face, no matter what time of day it was. It wasn't therapy. It wasn't daycare. It was something else. A place where children who didn't have the words, or had lost the courage to use them, could come and simply exist. Draw. Sit. Munch on something warm and familiar. And most of all, be listened to. Jasmine didn't hover. She didn't prod. She simply sat at her own little table in the corner, sipping tea, waiting for a child to come sit beside her when they were ready. Sometimes they came in crying. Sometimes they didn't make eye contact. But eventually, they all drew something. And when they did, Jasmine listened, not just with her ears, but with her heart. Word spread slowly. Teachers referred students. Social workers whispered the name to worried parents. And within 6 months, the listening table became more than a quiet corner of the community. It became a lifeline. On the door, painted in gentle script, were the words, "Not every voice speaks in words, but every heart needs to be heard." Some days were hard. Some stories were heavy. But Jasmine never doubted. Because she wasn't just feeding children pancakes. She was feeding something deeper. The same way someone had once fed her hope, with a folded letter and a quiet blessing. If this story made you believe, even just for a moment, that silence can be its own language, and that sometimes, the most powerful thing we can offer is not advice or answers, but simply presence, then help us keep that message alive. Leave a like to share that quiet faith with someone who may need it today. And if stories like this speak to your heart, stories of gentle strength, quiet kindness, and hope that doesn't shout, subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD so you won't miss the next chapter in this journey of humanity. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We'll see you again, in the next story that reminds us, sometimes being kind is louder than words.